So you want to understand how one British engineering company quietly became one of the most powerful businesses in the world. Not through social media, not through software, not through anything most people would associate with modern success, but through jet engines, specifically through figuring out a smarter way to sell them. Because here's the thing, Rolls-Royce does not just make some of the most advanced engines on the planet. They figured out a way to make money from those engines forever, long after the sale, long after the plane is built, long after the airline has forgotten what they originally paid, and the business model they invented to do it changed the entire aviation industry. But before we get to the money, we need to talk about the product. Because to understand why this business model is so brilliant, you first need to understand just how extraordinary these engines actually are. When most people hear Rolls-Royce, they think of a luxury car. A long hood, a silver ornament, old money. But the car company and the engine company split apart decades ago. Today, Rolls-Royce, the engineering company, builds the engines that power some of the largest and most advanced aircraft in the sky. We are talking about the Trent engine family, a series of massive jet engines that power aircraft like the Airbus A350, the Boeing 787 Dreamliner, and the Airbus A380, the largest passenger plane ever built. And these engines are big. We are not talking big like a car engine or even big like a truck engine. The fan at the front of a Rolls-Royce Trent XWB, the engine on the A350, is nearly 3 meters across. That is wider than most garden sheds. The engine weighs around 7 tons. It produces enough thrust to push a fully loaded aircraft weighing over 200 tons into the sky, and carry it halfway around the world without stopping. If you stood next to one at full power, the noise and force would be physically dangerous. These are not complicated machines. They are almost incomprehensibly complex machines that just happen to look simple from a distance. So how does a jet engine actually work? Because this part matters. At the front of the engine is a huge fan. You can see it when you look into the engine from the front of the plane. That fan pulls in enormous amounts of air. Most of that air actually goes around the engine, not through it. That bypassed air is what generates most of the thrust and is a big reason modern engines are so much more fuel efficient than older designs. The air that does go into the core gets compressed tighter and tighter by a series of spinning blades, almost like squeezing air into a smaller and smaller space. Then fuel is added and ignited. The burning gas expands rapidly and blasts out the back, pushing the aircraft forward. On the way out, that escaping gas spins a turbine, which connects back and keeps the compressor and the front fan spinning. The whole thing is a continuous cycle that sustains itself as long as fuel is flowing. Simple in theory, almost impossibly difficult in practice. The blades inside the hottest section of the engine operate at temperatures higher than the melting point of the metal they are made from. The only reason they do not melt is an elaborate system of internal cooling channels that run through each blade, pumping cool air through thousands of tiny holes. These blades are not stamped out in a factory. Each one is grown as a single crystal of metal in a carefully controlled process that takes hours per blade, and a single engine contains hundreds of them. Now here is where the business story starts. For most of aviation history, the way you sold a jet engine was straightforward. An airline buys a plane. The plane needs engines. You sell them the engines. The airline owns the engines. They maintain them. They repair them. They deal with all the problems. You collect your money and move on. On the surface, that sounds perfectly reasonable. But Rolls-Royce looked at that model and identified a problem. A jet engine is not a product you buy once and forget about. It is a product that requires constant, expensive, highly specialized care for its entire working life, and that working life can be 30 years or more. Every few thousand flying hours, the engine has to come off the wing and go through a major overhaul. Blades get replaced, seals get changed, worn components get swapped out. This maintenance is not cheap. It is not something an airline can do themselves. It requires specialist knowledge, specialist tools, and spare parts that only the manufacturer fully understands. Rolls-Royce looked at this reality and made a decision that changed everything. Instead of selling the engine and walking away, they said to airlines, "Do not buy the engine at all. Just pay us for every hour it flies." This is the model they called power by the hour. And it sounds almost too simple when you first hear it. The airline does not purchase the engine outright. They pay Rolls-Royce a fixed rate for every hour that engine spends in the air. In return, Rolls-Royce takes on full responsibility for keeping that engine running. All maintenance, all repairs, all overhauls, all parts. If the engine has a problem, that is Rolls-Royce's problem, not the airline's. Think about what this does for an airline. Instead of a massive upfront cost to buy engines, followed by unpredictable and expensive maintenance bills that arrive at random intervals, the airline now has a single, predictable cost per flying hour. Budgeting becomes dramatically easier. The risk of a surprise repair bill disappears. And crucially, the airline now has a very powerful incentive aligned with their own. They want to fly as many hours as possible. The more they fly, the more revenue they generate. And under power by the hour, the more Rolls-Royce earns, too. The interests of both companies point in exactly the same direction. But look at what this model does for Rolls-Royce. Because this is where it gets genuinely clever. The moment they moved from selling engines to selling flying hours, they did not just change their pricing structure, they fundamentally changed what kind of company they are. Under the old model, Rolls-Royce made money once. Engine leaves the factory, money arrives, transaction complete. Revenue was tied entirely to how many new engines they could sell, which meant it rose and fell with aircraft orders, with airline confidence, with the health of the global economy. Boom and bust, feast and famine. Under power by the hour, Rolls-Royce now earns money every single day, on every single flight, from every single engine in their global fleet. And that fleet is enormous. There are currently over 13,000 Rolls-Royce engines in service around the world. Every time a British Airways 787 takes off from Heathrow. Every time a Singapore Airlines A350 departs Changi. Every time a Qantas jet climbs out of Sydney. Rolls-Royce is earning. The revenue does not stop when the sale ends. It never really stops at all. This is what financial analysts call a recurring revenue model. And in business, recurring revenue is considered close to the most valuable kind of revenue that exists. It is predictable, it compounds over time, and it creates a relationship with the customer that is almost impossible to break. Because once an airline has built its operation around Rolls-Royce engines, switching to a competitor does not just mean buying different engines. It means retraining pilots, retraining engineers, rebuilding maintenance programs, renegotiating contracts. The switching cost is so high that most airlines simply do not do it. Rolls-Royce does not just sell you an engine, they quietly become infrastructure. Now let us talk about what sits inside this model that makes it defensible. Because a good business idea is only as strong as the barriers that protect it from being copied, and Rolls-Royce has built walls around this model that are extremely difficult to climb. The first wall is data. Under power by the hour, Rolls-Royce is financially responsible for every hour those engines run, so they monitor them obsessively. Every Rolls-Royce engine in service is connected in real time to ground-based monitoring centers. Sensors throughout the engine are constantly measuring temperatures, pressures, vibrations, and performance figures. Engineers on the ground can see exactly what an engine is doing mid-flight anywhere in the world. If a reading starts trending in an unexpected direction, Rolls-Royce knows before the pilots do. They can schedule maintenance before a problem becomes a failure. They can order parts before the aircraft even lands. This data capability took decades and billions of dollars to build. A competitor cannot replicate it overnight. And every additional hour of flight data that flows back to Rolls-Royce makes their models smarter, their predictions more accurate, and their advantage wider. The second wall is certification. Getting a new jet engine approved to fly on commercial aircraft is one of the most demanding regulatory processes in existence. It takes years. It costs hundreds of millions of dollars. The testing required is extraordinary. Engines are run to destruction. They are tested with ice, with rain, with birds deliberately fired into the fan blades to simulate strikes. Every single failure mode must be understood and designed against. By the time a new engine reaches certification, its manufacturer has accumulated knowledge that no newcomer can shortcut. The third wall is relationships. Airlines plan their fleets years, sometimes decades in advance. When an airline selects an engine for a new aircraft order, they are making a commitment that will shape their maintenance infrastructure, their training programs, and their operating costs for the next 20 to 30 years. These decisions are not taken lightly, and once taken, they are very rarely reversed. But this model is not without risk, and Rolls-Royce has learned that the hard way. When COVID-19 shut down global aviation in 2020, passenger flights essentially stopped. Planes sat on the ground, engines stopped flying hours. And under power by the hour, if the engine is not flying, Rolls-Royce is not earning. Revenue collapsed by billions of pounds in a matter of months. The company posted one of the largest losses in British corporate history. They had to raise emergency funding, cut thousands of jobs, and restructure their entire balance sheet just to survive. This is the hidden vulnerability of the model. It is deeply tied to the health of global aviation. When aviation thrives, Rolls-Royce thrives. When aviation stops, so does the income. The model that creates stability in normal times creates extreme fragility in a crisis. Managing that risk, building enough financial reserves to survive the inevitable downturns while continuing to invest in the next generation of engine technology is one of the hardest ongoing challenges the company faces. And the next generation of engine technology is genuinely consequential. Aviation is under enormous pressure to reduce its environmental impact. Carbon emissions, noise pollution, and fuel consumption are all under regulatory scrutiny in a way they have never been before. The engine manufacturers who solve these problems first will define the next era of commercial aviation. Rolls-Royce is currently developing engines designed for sustainable aviation fuel, exploring hybrid electric propulsion for shorter routes, and working on an entirely new engine architecture for the next generation of narrow-body aircraft that will replace the A320 and 737 families currently dominating the skies. These programs cost billions, they take decades, and they carry enormous technological risk, but they also carry enormous strategic reward. The airline that selects your engine for a new aircraft type in 2030 is potentially a power-by-the-hour customer generating revenue for you until 2060. The investment case for getting the next engine right is not just about the sale, it is about 30 years of flying hours that follow it. So why does any of this matter beyond the world of aviation? Because what Rolls-Royce actually invented was not just a pricing model for jet engines. It was a blueprint for how to sell complex, long-lived, high-stakes products in a way that aligns your success permanently with your customer's success. That idea has spread far beyond aviation. It shows up in industrial machinery, in medical equipment, in defense contracts, and software subscriptions. The logic is the same everywhere. Stop selling the product once. Start selling the outcome continuously. Rolls-Royce figured this out in the 1960s with jet engines. They built a business around it that now generates billions in recurring revenue, spans decades of customer relationships, and sits at the center of global aviation infrastructure. Not because they simply made a great engine. Plenty of companies make great engines. But because they asked a different question. Not how do we sell this engine, but how do we make sure we never stop earning from it? That is the kind of thinking that does not just build a successful product, it builds an industry.